First of all, thank you very much to John and the center for hosting this and having this. As he said, we met a few months ago, and it seems kind of interesting because a lot of environmental paths are beginning to cross. And Agriburbia and the subject matter excuse me, that we're interested in is kind of seeing where all those pieces come together. So when I start out, can everybody hear me, by the way? Everybody okay? I usually like to try and put a bit of a fine point on what the issue is. And so I always ask a couple of things or talk about a couple of things. And it's hard to know what to believe today. You read the magazine and you read stuff and you see things on YouTube, and who knows what's really real, what's really not. But if you stick a peg in the ground somewhere and you say that it's probably true that the demographers are right, there'll be 9 billion people on the planet in 2050. And that's pretty straight line math to do that on the current trend, and don't see that reversing. So it's 2010, and that'll be by 2050. That means that we have 39 tries left to feed half again as many people. We have 39 seasons. That's incredible when you talk about that in terms of farming. When you say 2050, it sounds way out there. That means we only have 39. Next year we'll have 38 tries to figure out how we're going to feed that many people. So when I'm talking, when I'm talking and giving this lecture, I always have a whole bunch of urgency, and sometimes the developers in the world kind of say, wow, you know, the economy's slow. Yeah, but you know what? People are still being born. People are still eating. And there's another very interesting thing about development and development with food. As we have more people on the planet, we tend to bunch up, and we're actually seeing more and more of how we used to live, where sister doesn't leave, you know, or grandparents live with us or whatever. So it's not a direct proportional curve to the amount of housing we need, but every mouth is 2,000 calories a day. So it's a pretty interesting problem that we have to solve. And one of the things that we like to talk about is that what we're really doing is we're building the infrastructure for the next generation of farming, which includes housing. And that's part of what differentiates us from industrial agriculture and some of the other things that are happening. And you'll kind of see how that works and why we need to build shelter with the farms, because that's the way we avoid using pesticides and we avoid doing the other things. It's also a cultural issue. And we're going to talk in a few minutes kind of about, it's not really peak oil, but in an energy scarce environment, how we do this and why it's important. So that's part of the whole game. Just to let you know, he kind of already induced us. I need to make sure everybody knows that the smart one is at home in Colorado with the kids, but she gets credit for doing this. She's actually a biologist and a planner as well, and she's half owner of TSR. We do a whole variety of things: sustainable development management, land planning, civil, all this kind of thing. Here's the one that's really interesting. This was a relatively new thing for us. And once we started talking about how you would really integrate, you know, food and farming or whatever, all of the farmers decided they wanted to stay in the game. Why would I just wait till there's enough zeros on the check and then leave? If I can stay in the game and I can produce and I can do what I've done for 30 years, I just have to do it around some houses. So we do a variety of things. I think it's also really important to know that particularly here, we did not do all this work. We got called in when Bill thought it might be a great idea by these gentlemen. Actually, gentlemen, raise your hand. Lee McLaren, Craig George, and James Dancy are the folks. They own DPR, which is a design firm in Charlotte. And they were working on this project and had the foresight to see that, wow, this has some potential here. So I want to make sure they get credit. So everybody knows all these things. Everybody reads about them all the time. We have water problems, we have fuel problems, and we have the the interesting thing is that we get spikes on the Agriburbia website every time there's a food scare. Every time the peanuts get poisoned or you see a salmonella or an E. coli outbreak, everybody Googles Agra something, and we get giant hits on the website. So people understand that the system is broken. They don't understand how to fix it, and that's what we're trying to figure out as we go here. One of the things that's really important about all of these things, and I know it kind of gets tired after a while, you kind of say it, but your food choice actually makes more difference than almost anything you can do. And it's local, it's better food, it's a variety of things, but it affects all those things that are on there. Water quality, security, everything. Okay, so this is an interesting thing about history. We're back where we started from. And if you read in the literature, it's very interesting because before the advent of fossil fuels, before coal came out of the ground in England, we started the Industrial Revolution. It's all in there. Everybody's panicked because we're building with trees, we're heating with trees, we're cooking with trees. There's not going to be a tree left on the planet, anywhere. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And then magically, somebody stuck a shovel in the ground and said, wow, this coal stuff burns. Let's try that. So, but that's where we are. Excuse me. That's where we're back to now. And so we're kind of coming around. And this is a pretty important idea here. In the technical world, kind of what I live in every day, which is, square feet and land use and all the kinds of things, civil engineering and land planning. I mean, we have phones the size of chiclets, and we still talk about land in acres. And I can tell you, you can grow a lot of food on a quarter-acre lot if you work at it and you try it. In fact, it's actually more promising to do that in the right circumstances. And that's kind of what we're talking about. So one of the main things that we talk about is that we have to use smaller units to account for the ground around us. And once you start doing that, it's amazing all the things that can happen from a land use standpoint. So we were trying to figure out, we knew it was a good idea. We knew growing food next to us would be a really good idea. They did it for 10,000 years and nobody complained. But we're trying to figure out how you actually would, what's the real reason? Why is it so important? So we came up with this carbon triangle. And the easiest thing is just to explain it. And what we're trying to do, it's basically just a graph that has 3 criteria on it instead of 2. Normally a graph has 2 criteria, X and Y. This is a graph that has 3 criteria. And the whole point of that is to figure out the 3 things that you need to live. You need 3 things. You need shelter, you need communication. So we call transportation communication. It's kind of in the same bucket. We'll see how the internet really turns out, if it really saves any fuel or not. But the reality is you need to work with other humans. It's just part of being alive. But you also need food. Well, for years, all the developers in the world have worked diligently on these. Said, oh yeah, we're building houses and we got to make sure we get a road to the house because otherwise nobody will buy it if there's no way to get there with a car. So this whole thing, and actually what's interesting is you guys are here in Charlotte or in this area, you're doing the light rail thing. So this is the part where the planners are all trying to figure out if we get dense enough, we're all going to survive. This is the LEED stuff for everybody that knows LEED, LEED. This is getting all the carbon out of the buildings. So this is the shelter piece. So here's LEED, here's transit-oriented development or light rail or densification as an idea. So nobody was working on this piece. Turns out if you get too dense and nobody's farming, you starve to death. It doesn't make any difference whether you can't grow, if you can go anywhere or not. It doesn't make any difference whether you can get on the light rail if you can't eat. So from a spatial standpoint, from where we're going to live and where our food comes from, it's the most important thing to figure that out, how we're going to get that. We actually coined a term called caloric proximity. And in a few years, probably, who knows, 10, 15 years, you will buy your house based on caloric proximity. In other words, how close is it to my real source of sustenance? It's not that far away. So this is a typical suburban triangle. So the transportation just depends on what kind of car you drive and how far you have to commute. If you go into Charlotte from here, it's a little bit more. If you don't, whatever. Your shelter depends mostly on when your house was built. Actually, right now, I live in a 1971 house, and it was, has aluminum windows and aluminum wiring, has everything bad in the building industry you can possibly get, and at least like a sieve. But we're working on it. We put PV panels on it so we can do all the repair work under solar energy. But here's the food thing, and this depends really on where your food comes. And if you live in the suburbs, it comes a long way away. It goes to the supermarket and you buy it there. And that's kind of how that works. So if you're an industrial farmer, say you're an Iowa corn farmer or a wheat farmer or something in Colorado, this is kind of what your triangle looks like. Because you're a farmer, you probably have a kitchen garden. You might get some of your diet, but really, actually, most of the farmers I know actually eat at the supermarket. They eat out of the supermarket. They might be watering their stock off of wells and windmills and things like that. So they're a little bit lower on the shelter. They might even be partially off-grid. But their transportation carbon is huge. Does anybody know what the representation of transportation carbon for a farmer is? When I was growing up, even in the 60s, you could die of a heart attack. If you lived out in the hinterland, there was no way to get to you. That was part of your choice. You lived out there by choice and you farmed and you did stuff, but we call that flight for life now. Everybody has basically the same standard of living. So farmers come in for education, they come in for lawyers, for doctors, all kinds of things. So their transportation is huge now. Here's the light rail scenario. I got called the anti-planner in the Denver Post. Great, huh? That's what I do for a living. I'm a planner, and I got called an anti-planner. But so if you live along a light rail line, if you live in a nice apartment complex or something that's like that, even if it's a LEED platinum building, your transportation carbon may be very little. Your shelter carbon is shared by all those units and may be very little. But your food carbon is the highest it will ever be. It travels the farthest. It's the most processed. You eat out at restaurants all the time. We're not trying to be judgmental. It's really, really important. We don't care. And in fact, in different times in your life, you have different triangles. This is also the college triangle. Because if you live in a dorm and eat pizza and study all the time, this is what your footprint is like. This is what your carbon triangle looks like. So we're trying to figure out how to measure real carbon. Okay, so that's what Agriburbia is. If you walk in the door to our firm or to DPR, or if you have this idea, like Bill's trying to work through here, and you say, how are we really going to live when it's a fuel-constrained society and when we need to work, we need to do those things? We have to design things to all three criteria. After you've been doing it for a while, we've been doing it for 10 years. So when somebody comes in the office and we're talking about it, it seems kind of silly that you wouldn't design infrastructure to make sure people got all their needs met. But for years, it's just the way it worked. And developers built shelter and farmers did food. And they just never the twain shall meet. So that's what Agriburbia is all about. So if you walk away with anything, the idea here is that Agriburbia is the economic idea and the physical design characteristics to get to all three things people need. This is all, I've said all this, but one of the things that's important here is that we're not doing other things. So new urbanism things and all the bioswales and all the air quality things that the centers do, all those still apply. We're just saying food needs to be in the equation. And if you put food in the equation, it actually solves a lot of the others. So how did we get there? Anybody? This is Versailles. So in Europe, the more land you had past what you need for survival, that was the bling. That was what you did. That was how you showed your wealth. And we just kind of show this jokingly, but the reality is this is what we have because of that. That came directly across the pond, as they say, and landed here in this country. And almost everywhere else in the world, a quarter acre is a big piece of land. And we put a house in the middle of it, and we don't do anything else but recreate on the rest of it. And so we have 31 million acres of lawn in this country, 300 million gallons of gas, 1 billion hours of labor toward that. And I give this speech equally to farmers and developers. I get hit by both sides. They both throw stuff at me. But the reality is, I tell the farmers, $17 billion a year. How come you guys don't want any of that? Now, the young ones do. The old guys, oh, you can't get a 40 bottom plow around in that, and, you know, and they can come up with every excuse in the book or whatever. Hope nobody's offended. I'm a farmer too. I grew up that way. But the reality is that the young guys all say, oh, I'd much rather clear $100,000 on 10 acres and have it on drip irrigation and really be the rock star. We think the farmers are going to be the rock stars in the next 20 years. We got to set up the infrastructure for that to happen, though. By the way, there's no clip art in here. A fact we're very proud of. There's no clip art. Everything is stuff we've either grown or we're doing or we have in place or whatever. So it's in the days of you never know what's real, I'm telling you, everything here is stuff that's real. So here's the cultural part of this. Okay, if there's a peak oil coming and you know nobody knows exactly when, I'm a geologist by original training, so peak oil is not a new idea to me. I know how it got there, I know how we're doing, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's 10 years, 15 or 20 or 50 years away. I may not live to see it, but my kids will. We know it's finite because you can't process it. Biofuels, by the way, anybody that's familiar with biofuels, is just a shortcut of that. We still take chlorophyll-based carbon and turn it into burnable carbon chains. We still do that. It's just a shorter process. So, you know, the idea that peak oil is not there. But like I say, it's cultural issues other than that. What are all the people that used to work for GM going to do? What are all the people that are out there? I mean, eventually, we've got to figure out a way to make meaningful work for all stages. And you'll see in a minute when we're going over the maps kind of how that works. But there's truly a call for 30 million farmers. In fact, one of your own native sons, Aaron Newton, who wrote a book called The Nation of Farmers, maybe some of you have read it, is calling for 100 million. We politely disagree with that, but there's a real demographic reason behind that number. At any given time in the public, there's 3 to 5% of almost every profession. There's 3 to 5% lawyers, 3 to 5% architects, 3 to 5%, and it just varies accordingly. What's the one thing there's less of? Farmers. There's only 1% left. What's the one thing you do every day, all day? Do you hire an architect all day, every day? No, you eat all day. It's the strangest thing to talk about because it's backwards. So we really need to have 10% of the country actively involved in for-profit farming. We love CSAs, we love urban gardens, we like volunteerism, but if we're going to feed 9 billion people, it's a serious thing. We have to build the infrastructure and find a way to get 30 million people on a piece of ground with water successfully to farm. The good news is, if you're a developer, there aren't any bigger markets. 30 million people that want to buy a farm, a mini farm. Doesn't make any difference how big it is. It's how much you produce on that, on a unit production scale. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is really important idea. This is a cultural thing. We got to get people working and productive at various stages of life. Here's just real quick, for instance. So everybody goes, well, you know, everybody has this idea of how farming works, and it's either migrant labor or it's this or, you know, people out sweltering. We have one project in Colorado. It's a small project, 29 acres, but it's an active 55 plus community. Now, those guys, you know, they're not going to be out weeding at 2 or 3 in the afternoon in blazing hot sun. They also can't sleep. So from 5:30 to 11:30, you have a workforce the likes of which you've never reckoned with. It's unbelievable. They're all trained. They're ready to go. They go out. They love to do it. We pay them. They have a big lunch, take a big nap, and wake up the next day and do it again. And everybody's healthy. So it's a matter of putting the infrastructure in place to make that happen. All right, so real quick, we're trying to not be LEED-like, not that LEED is bad, but it just has gotten so checklisty that we're trying to give people guiding principles on how and why you do what you do if you're doing Agriburbia. So no net loss of ag value. So we look at the piece of property and we figure out what the history is. We say, oh, this was an orange grove, or this was an apple orchard, or whatever it was, and we say, wow, okay, we figure out what that is. It turns out it's a very low bar. Once you bring infrastructure and people and all the brain power to it, I've never had a project that we've worked on where we couldn't reach or greatly exceed the existing agricultural regime that was in place. Production of a significant portion of the dietary requirements, 30 to 50% or more. Okay, so this is where we have to do a little math in our head, but it's okay. I'll help you through it, like my calc professor used to say. I'll help you through it. Didn't work. So we said, you don't have to eat the food that's next to you. This is a land use idea. This is why it's really important for developers and city managers and everything. It's a land use idea. If you're going to actually develop 100 acres or whatever it is, we can tell you that there's going to be 400 homes there. And we can tell you that there's going to be whatever, 842 people there or whatever. Those numbers are pretty well known. It's also pretty well known and established that even with variety of diets, that all those people eat 2,000 or 2,500 calories a day. So we treat agriculture just like the demographics that Walmart uses when they're counting rooftops or anybody else is counting rooftops for their economic deal. And we can tell you exactly how many calories will be consumed in the subdivision. Once you know that number, you have an obligation, or if you're doing Agriburbia, you have an obligation to recreate at least a portion of those calories. That's what brings the footprint in. That's what allows us to do that. That's what's efficient. So they don't have to eat that food necessarily. They can. But from a land use standpoint, and we call those replacement calories. So those are replacement calories. So 30 to 50%. The reason that it's not 100%, everybody goes, well, why isn't it 100%? Why don't you build it? Because there are places that people want to build where you can't do that. How many people go to the beach? Anybody go to the beach? I always, when I'm back west, I always say, how many people ski? Well, you know, we do recreate and we do things and we need people there to do that. And I can tell you, you can't get 100% replacement calories in many of the places that we build things. But you should try. You should aim for a goal. Provide commercially viable opportunities for enhanced self-sufficiency and local market growing. This is the economic part, and this is the important part because this is what makes all of the people there productive. Integrate sustainable energy practices. Why would you do all this and then not do all the other good things? Why would you do Agriburbia and grow a bunch of food and not try and do the other stuff? By the way, it was kind of interesting. Our personal home was on the solar tour in Denver, and we got all the people that signed up for the tour to come, and it's because they advertised it as the first solar farm in the state. And it runs entirely off the solar. We've built a giant array. It's just short of a commercial array because we're going to eventually have a winery on the property. It's 2 acres. But it was fascinating. People were just dying to know how you're going to grow food on solar energy. And it's like, that's how we're going to have to do it. All right. Yeah, you know, it's like the sun. All right. So one of the things we're not doing is creating museums, though. This isn't Williamsburg. This isn't Amish country, although it's interesting to note the Amish, they're not really all uptight about the economy like we are. There's something to say about that. My wife is actually from Pennsylvania. She lives in Amish country. She's not Amish, but it's pretty interesting how they don't ebb and flow with the news like we do. So, but the point there is that we're not trying to go backwards. We're trying to figure out how we're all going to live in the next 120 years. And to do that, we can't cast aside all of the knowledge that we've gained and all of the business that we've created. So we use all those. We use all the financial techniques, PIFs and TIFs, and tax increment financing for those that don't know, and metropolitan districts to pay for this. And this is the magic that makes the farming work. This is where development actually helps you become a better farmer, because as a farmer, you can't afford to borrow and to buy some of the infrastructure that you really need. We talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but just suffice it to say, these are all very modern and they're very well-financed kind of ideas. This just tells you where we got them going. All over the country, there's actually a bunch of these filled in now. That's where all the interest in. Most of those are stopped. Most of those are just waiting. A lot of them are platted. Bill's is the furthest along, actually. Just everybody, I said this at dinner tonight, but I think it's really important for everybody in this community to understand that based on literally where we are, I want to give everybody some national precedent, some national perspective on this. That if we can get this to move, get Granite Quarry, get the farmstead to move, it will be the very first one that has this financial model. There are other ones that kind of have some farming in it, whatever, but actually work this way. And it would be very exciting. I mean, really, really exciting. So here it is. You guys all know where this is? You recognize it? The plat's approved. The Agriburbia overlay's approved. There are folks from Granite Quarry in the room. We should thank them. They've been very cooperative. I think they understand what's in front of them as well, that this could be a model project or is a model project as we get it done about the way we're going to live. 126 acres, previously tilled land, 54 acres, approximately $20,000, basically haying it. And this is kind of, keep those numbers in the back of your mind because this is kind of where it gets interesting. So here's the Agriburbia design. There's the irrigation storage ponds, single-family lots. There's a range of sizes. Sometimes we actually have larger ones, sometimes we don't. There's actually back here in another phase, there might even be 1 acre, 2 acre kind of lots. We're not overly consumed with that as long as the overall land use numbers work. There's commercial areas out at the front room, a farmer's market. If anybody's actually been to the site, this site was actually made for Agriburbia. It's stunning, and the existing infrastructure that's there is already basically done the way we would do it. It's got a barn, it's got a farmer's market shed, it's got a whole bunch of resources that we would normally build in a project to get there. Total of 280 dwelling units. There's 30 acres of open space, of common area. It's important. We still believe in the all the wildlife and everything. We're not trying to farm every square inch. We respect the rights of all the other things on the planet, so we're coming at it from that standpoint. But here's where it gets interesting. There was no way to even talk about it, so we had to coin terms. Civic farm. The civic farm is really like the public farm or quasi-public farm. It's not really a public entity. It can be owned by the HOA, it can be owned by the city, it can be owned by a park or rec district, it can be owned a variety of ways, but it's not in individual ownership. And that's kind of makes it a quasi-public idea. It's typically a cash crop. That's what makes it attractive to the farmer. All the infrastructure that's coming, all the irrigation and all that kind of thing, and the market is what makes it really attractive for a farmer to do this. There's 25 acres of civic farm that's temporary. So as we know now, the market doesn't always go at the same speed. It goes up and down or whatever. And one of the ways to ensure that we're doing the right thing with the land is to lay out a long-term plan so that things happen over time. So while we're waiting for these units to develop over time, we can be farming that and giving good groceries and creating jobs and things like that in the community. So there's 39 total acres of civic farmland, permanent and temp. It's a contract or a lease, and it's typically managed by the homeowners association. And what happens is the homeowners association is kind of pathetic. I go around the country, all over the country, talking to homeowners association, and some are better than others. It depends on where they're located, but I can't tell you how many homeowners association meetings I've been to, and they're basically having to have a special bake sale or blood drive or something to buy a $200 doorknob for the shed or something. I mean, it is pathetic. And one of the line items on the HOA budget is $450,000 for 2,4-D and mowing for the open space. That's money going out instead of coming in. So we're saying, hey, let's use the land, and that money that the farmer pays in rent for that actually comes back in. And it actually pays for things. In fact, actually, when we model some of these, the money is so good from the farming that it helps fix potholes and things in the road. It can reduce the HOA dues. In fact, it can actually not have them in some cases. All right, so here's the steward farms. So there's two pieces to every Agriburbia. We got to give opportunity to use the open space land and to use the land as kind of a larger professional farming idea. And it's all professional farming. It's really, really important. We have people that jump in and say, oh yeah, I want to learn to be a farmer, and they spend 2 weeks and they realize how hard it is. It's really hard, and there's a lot of risk, but it's really lucrative if you have the infrastructure behind you. So these are the steward farms. These are all the private lots, though, and we call it assisted farming, and this is an interesting economic idea. So we said, well, why, if you have an itinerant lawn mowing service, if I have a pickup truck and a trailer and I have like 5 mowers and a bunch of guys going around and we're grooming everything and cutting grass with pinking shears and everything to make it perfect, why can't that same labor force be doing something that makes money instead of costing the development or costing the developer money? And that's basically what this is. So the contract farmer that farms this, or a different entity, actually can go house to house, and you can do it. So there's a couple different ways. If you want to buy a lot here, there's a couple different ways it works. You can be a self-salad lot. So you can do whatever you want. It's one of the things that differentiates us from co-housing. We love the co-housing or intentional housing or whatever. We love that as a niche idea. We're trying to figure out how this is going to work at big scales. And so these are market lots. These are actually market sale lots. There's no contract, there's nothing like that or whatever. But if you buy one of the lots, you can do nothing. You can just plant grass if you want or do whatever traditional deal. That's up to you. You can do a self-salad lot. So that means you grow as much as you want, any kind. There's no limit. There are some specific limits, though. You can't do your front yard because there are still certain things out there that are, but the lots are designed so that that works really well. Or you can partake in the assisted farming. You say, yeah, I'll just have all of my land that I'm stewarding. It's a really important word choice. That's why we didn't say, local farmer or anything else. We said steward farms or steward lots because it's your choice of land use. How the farming gets done is a multitude of different ways. But you as a homeowner say, I'm not going to let this quarter acre just go to waste. So this kind of looks at, it's a little blow up just so you can see. Those are all 10-foot squares, so you can see it's about 700 square feet, up to 1,000 square feet for each one, which is an amazing amount. Because I'm going to show you this. Everybody goes, well, what would that look like? Well, this is that. So this is an 80 by 110 lot, roughly. This is a very traditional, we got millions of them out there. And this is what it looks like if you get your whole diet, your whole veggie diet. These are not proteins. Nobody's screamed that out yet. What about the cows? We'll get to that. But this is all your veggie calories. And you still have lawn and play area. And this is where the microzoning comes in. This is really interesting. Granite Quarry people can't listen to this. This is microzoning. Yeah. But what's this for? What is that really for? Can everybody read it? It says driveway. What if you don't have a car? Do you need a driveway? That's transportation as a land use. So if you don't have a car, you don't need a driveway. Or if you only have one car, you only need half of that space. This is where it gets back to counting ground by the square foot. This is also, if this didn't say garage and it said greenhouse on it? Storage center. Yeah. So this is really shelter. And this is really recreation. And this is really food. And as on just that small lot, if we account for that, the numbers add up. You'll see it's extraordinary. So here's the summary slide. Out of the whole thing, when it's built out, all the houses are there or whatever, there's 18 acres of total civic and steward farmlands. That's if everybody plays. We can't force you to, but we're assuming that that'll work. 34% of the previously tilled land is still in production. That's just a design thing. We don't have to do anything else. We just have to design it that way so it works that way, 34% of it. The net annual ag value went from $22,000 to roughly $100,000. Oh, how can that be? That can't be. That's crazy. Why don't farmers do that? Farmers can't capitalize it. This is the magic synergy between development, between living and the cities and where we live and farming. We need that development to capitalize to do this the right way. This takes irrigation, it's intensive, it takes labor, you got to have the market there, you got to build the buildings. In this case, the buildings are already built, but we would need to build those buildings. You got to have storage, you got to have hoop houses. It's an interesting thing. We had a farmer hired to do this project, and because of the time, it has kind of dwindled away, but the most interesting thing was, I asked him one day, I said, well, what would it take to like double your production? Let me preface that by saying, if anybody in the room is a developer and kind of aware of what the numbers are like, things don't even make it into the discussion around the table unless they typically have like 6 figures. It's just almost not even worth talking about unless it's $100,000, because pipelines cost $500,000 and curb costs $2 million and all this other kind of stuff. So I asked the farmer, I said, what would it take to double your production? He didn't want to answer. He was so embarrassed. He said, I could probably double my production if I had a hoop house. Well, how much is that? $7,000. $7,000. And he could double his production because he can extend on both ends of the season. And he can't find a way to borrow that. And we're building subdivisions that have houses in it, and we're worried about where the food's coming from. So that's why it's an interesting thing all around. All of that's basically on a half the typical agricultural water usage too. Here it's a little different. In the West, where we started working with this, it's a third because everything's irrigated out there. But irrigation is a very important part of that. And we even know people that are in the Northeast in Pennsylvania now that are trying to figure out a way to finance irrigation. And it's because when agriculture becomes a real land use, a bankable land use, like we talk to the banks about this. In other words, they say, are you insured? Because I'm going to actually make a note based on this. I'm going to loan somebody money on this. And if it hails, I don't want you walking in the door and saying, I mean, turns into real business. And if you have 3 hot days and lose your crop, when for the want of some drip irrigation, you could have saved it, that's why it becomes really important. It's part of the whole idea. There's an additional 21 acres that are farmed while you're developing it. This is just to show how we count calories. So that's pole beans. Pole beans are 90 calories a square foot, so that's 9,000 calories. Calories are the fungible unit. And this is where agriculture is we diverge. We get everybody angry. I get all the developers mad at me, and then I turn around and get all the farmers mad at me. We can't continue to farm the way we do. And farming the way we do means I grow potatoes because my dad grew potatoes, and that's how I know what to grow, and I just grow as many potatoes as I possibly can and hope the market's there. Doesn't work. Any developer in the room ever built a house without some kind of feasibility work? Doesn't happen. When you spend real money to get things going, you have to know that the market's there. So when we do these, we actually go and we figure out how many calories. We count calories by census tract. It's very interesting. Like how many calories spatially on a map. We're GIS folks, so we're always intrigued by this. So we actually make calorie maps, like where they're consumed. And we figure out how much of that market we could capture by growing the food here locally. It's very specific, and it's really important. So that's 1 million calories on one of the lots. Just one. That's not even the open lots. That's just one of the small lots. That's how productive it can be once you get the labor and the water and the dirt in the right place. Okay, here's the money slide. This is not the graph for this project. It hasn't been done yet, but this is a graph for a similar project. And the reason I'm showing it is because this is the economic reason why you want to do this. And I show this at ULI. Anybody here from ULI, Urban Land Institute, or the Home Builders, NAHB? I show this to those guys, and they start shaking. They just shake in their seats. They realize they've missed a whole revenue stream for the last 20 years of their career. It's really interesting. So this is the traditional development curve. So I'm buying the land here, and I've got all the money tied up and whatever, and then I'm going to dig, and I'm putting in the pipe, and I'm going to do all these. This is where I'm spending a lot of money. And then I get here, and I hope I have a couple of really good seasons. Some guy standing out there, with an arrow sign trying to get you to buy, on Saturday. But here's where every developer in the world wants to get. I sold the last lot. And most of them are stuck over here somewhere. Most of them are stuck over here right now. But if you actually do Agriburbia and you actually optimize the ground from the day that you walk on the land, you have to spend some money still. Like I say, there's still some infrastructure. The key there is we never take the infrastructure out. We plan for both revenue streams. So we build the roads, we build the water, we build the sewer. It's all the same thing. And we just build it to get to both revenue streams. So we never have to take it out. We never have to go back and say, oh, shoot, we're going to put houses here now. Let's tear everything out we did. We don't do that. But if that's in place, you get all this revenue. This green curve represents farming all that ground while you're waiting. And then it goes down because you're selling lots out from underneath the agriculture. This line here, though, this is the economic manifestation of sustainability. That's what that is. This is what happens when you are efficient with the ground around you, when you're actually using it for all the human needs. That's why we can bring our footprint in, because all the ground around us is being used so well and so efficiently. So this goes on forever. Craig, last couple years ago when I was down here, Craig and I were touring around talking to developers or whatever. You know, I was trying to be nice because they could all see the trouble, you know, what it's going to be like. And I said, wouldn't it be great if you had $500,000 a year residual for every project you've done in the last 10 years? What you do with this line, that's totally up to you. We have one developer that says, wow, that's okay. This is a really high-end development, and I'm going to donate all that to charity, either the produce or the receipts for the produce. Or this can pay for fixing the roads. Or this can pay to have no HOA fees. Or this can pay for, the list goes on and on and on. But this represents the investment to make all that ground productive, and that's why it really works. So everybody, you can throw tomatoes as long as they're organic. 3 to 7 professional farm management jobs, 150 dedicated skilled labor opportunities, numerous value. You can't even count how many other jobs tear down from this. And typically, folks from the city will tell you they're looking for the commercial ground because that's the point. And commercial ground won't go there until there's a bunch of rooftops. This works the way a real town works. We get agricultural value out of it, and then because we get agricultural value out of it, we need people to work there, we need people to buy there, we need to have a restaurant there, we need to have something else there, and it actually works like a real town works. And so that's how that actually happens. This is the edible landscape stuff, just to see what yards look like. Those are real products. This looks like big farming. There's nothing here bigger than an acre. But it's organized, and it's beautiful, and it's hand-tended. Why does everybody want to live in Sonoma? Well, not everybody wants to live in California. I should say that, preference that. But why is it attractive to live in Sonoma or Napa Valley? It's beautiful. Why is it beautiful? Because it's well maintained. And why is it well maintained? Because somebody's making money on it. Somebody is making a profit on it. You can't pay enough to make things beautiful just as a maintenance fee. And if we set it up so that people actually make money and do well doing it, it's beautiful all the time. We have a giant spreadsheet of basically everything you can put in your mouth. All the herbs, all the stuff, and things that you can't, flowers and things too. And it's really important because we sort that spreadsheet from caloric value down. But guess what? Nobody wants to eat Brussels sprouts 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. So we can't grow all Brussels sprouts. That would be the best economy. I mean, it's stunning. But you know what? If you do really high quality organic basil and you sell it direct, this is a really important thing. We own the whole supply chain. Sell it direct, you can make $26,000 an acre. But that's when you buy your food from the farmer. And that's really, really important. That's why. But these are all really high quality, densely caloric foods, not commodities. So that brings us to the other thing. There's one more slide that has a discussion about your whole diet and proteins and things, so we'll get to that. One thing I want to mention here that's really important, though, zinnias, People say it's not possible. You know, I'm a scientist, so I'm not the anti-Monsanto guy, and I'm not that, you know, there's a place for all the science. We've got to figure out, I may not want to eat GMO food, but we're going to need to have fuel, and we're going to need other things. So I don't want to beat up on anybody else, but the reality is, a lot of time I say, well, how can it be that productive? It just can't work. You have to have pesticides. You got to have this. So we grow zinnias. So put all these pieces together, and you'll figure out how this works and why it's a design issue. We put on our place, 2 acres, we have 48 zones of drip irrigation. Now, this is out west, so it's all drip, but it's the same idea. Everybody says, you're crazy. Why'd you do all that? Why'd you spend all that money? Because we plant zinnias every 3rd or 4th row, which corresponds to the drip tape. And as a result, we have no pests, and then we sell the pesticide. We make almost as much money selling the zinnias for table decorations. So we make money on the pesticide, but you have to be able to control the irrigation so that you don't drown the veggies. So this is why it takes infrastructure to do it the right way. And once you do it that way, you can do that. And then we found out, guess what? We're selling the zinnias, and once all the chefs found out that they've never been sprayed, ever, with anything, they stopped putting them on the table, and they pluck all the petals, and they put them in the salad to color the salad. He said, you're crazy. I wouldn't eat zinnias. Are you crazy? Anyway. So, the benefits of Agriburbia. Agriburbia provides opportunity for farm landowners to stay in the development. This is a really, really important thing. Provides excellent opportunities for high-quality professional agricultural farm jobs. And this is what I mentioned before. We like all of the urban gardening, and we like kind of all the volunteerism, but it won't feed 9 billion people. We need the infrastructure for people to be rock stars at this. And we already have a couple of guys that are hired and kind of waiting for some of them to get built, and they know that. They're going to get a house on the corner, and when everybody drives in with their grandparents or their in-laws, they're going to say, oh, that's where the farmer lives. Isn't this beautiful? God, he's really good. He's a nice guy, too. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Smooths the revenue curves and helps absorption for those developers in the room. This is a cash flow thing, and if you're going to wait for 20 years to build houses or whatever, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to do this. It's imperative. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to use the ground. Brings better infrastructure and services such as medical and educational to rural areas. This is why we can't all live in the city. We have to be farmers, and we have to live sustainably at every density. And then best practices for energy, water, and land use, and then self-sufficient. That's the real thing. You can't believe how many people call me and email me and say, I'm ready to go. I just want to do something so I know. They don't want to give up their iPhone. I don't either, you know. But they want to know where their food comes from, and they want to be productive. It's a Jeffersonian idea. So, okay, here's the big question. Let's see if everybody gets this. First of all, we got to do the feet. We have to track what we're doing much closer. That's a given. We talked about that already. We need to address all 3 human need components with every decision. That's the most important thing here. Every piece of infrastructure that this country builds from this moment on should have in mind, how does this work for both shelter and food for people, and communication? How does it help and further all those, or is one of them left off the table? In the future, there'll be 3 different agricultures: industrialized, commodities, and fuels. Okay, so what's the next big corporate-to-corporate fight? Not corporate to government, corporate-to-corporate fight. This is really going to be interesting in the next 20 years. Anybody got any idea? So I'll give you a little clue. Anybody in here an ExxonMobil shareholder? Nobody's a BP shareholder anymore. I went to school in New Orleans, so it breaks my heart, you know, to see what's happened. But that's just the beginning. I mean, that's just what's going to happen the more and more we try to get the last drop out. Do you think all of the ExxonMobil shareholders are just going to say, oh, that's it, the gig's up, whew, glad it's over, I lost billions and billions of dollars? What happens when the feedstock for their shares stops coming out of a 7-inch hole in the ground? ConAgra, ADM, Cargill, and to a lesser extent Monsanto, own all but 4 of the commercial grade elevators in the country, either in direct name or as a subsidiary. And Murdoch, about 6 years ago, bought every train siding he could buy, because all those guys know where the feedstock for fuel is coming from. And if you think they're going to grow food, they're not, because it's a monetary thing. And that's okay, because we need the fuel. But we, as the local community, as people that are responsible for our own lives, need to figure out how to feed ourselves and need to figure out how to do that. And by the way, create jobs for our kids and create jobs for those people that are around us and for those adults that need other things to do. So the next giant thing, corporate to corporate, it's going to get pretty ugly. Nobody really knows what's going to happen there.